So what's interesting is when you're burned out, it means perceptions affect the epigenetics through transmitters, which affect the cells. We're sacrificing for them. People say, well, my highest value is business, but as I do it, I burn out. And I said, no, let me clarify something for you.
How do entrepreneurs, business owners, and experts influence themselves, their clients, and teams to maximize profitability, efficiency, and create lasting impact? How do they simplify life and business and yet still achieve more? What's the one thing separating the mediocre from the best? This podcast will give you the answers and reveal the secret strengths and the not so easy to admit flaws of the elite. My name is Satoru Mateo, and welcome to the Halfass to Badass podcast. Have you ever read a book on personal development, maybe been through some course or been to a seminar that promised to change your life, and it didn't really work out the way you thought it would? Maybe you were super pumped, you were full of energy right after, right? But then the high wore off. Ever had that feeling? I know I've had many times. It was so disappointing. And it was not until I heard a different perspective that life took on a whole new meaning. The man you're about to hear today inspired me to start looking at things through a different lens. Sometimes a small shift in perspective can make a huge difference. The man you're about to meet today will share some of his wisdom that he has synthesized from thousands of years of great minds, from theologians, Nobel Prize winners, to the best in science, business, finance, and health. Let's welcome Dr. John Demartini to this episode. Welcome to the show, John. We have you here today for the fourth time because we love you, and we know that your topic, your conversations are something that we trust. And the first question I have for you regarding health and wellness, because our last conversation that got so much views around relationships. The question I have is, how does connection and intimacy correlate with wellness?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, if you're not doing so well in the relationship, you can be stabbed. So you're not going to do so well. I'm joking, of course. I'd like to start that answer with the idea of intimacy. Many people assume when they think of an intimate moment that they think of sort of a passionate sexual moment for most people. That's when they think of, oh, this person was intimacy last night. But I'd like to reframe what intimacy is.
Beautiful.
Intimacy is pure reflective awareness. And let me elaborate. Pure reflective awareness. We've all been in a situation in a relationship where we've put somebody on a pedestal. We've been infatuated. We have an impulse to seek them, a fear of losing them, and we've minimized ourselves to them and been willing to sacrifice some of the important things in our life to be with them. Most people can identify with that. While we do that, we're too humble to admit that what we see in them and what we admire them, that we have it equally. And so we have deflected that part of ourselves, dismembered, disidentified with, disowned it. So there's a gap, an emptiness between what we see in them and what we see in us. And that's not reflective, it's deflective. We're deflecting what we see in them inside us. And there's an emptiness that occurs and a yearning to want to have a match where there's purely a fair exchange and sustainability in the relationship. And when we're the underdog, it's not fair. We're sacrificing for them until we eventually build up enough resentment to get ourselves back into balance. We also have moments when we're resentful to somebody and we're too proud to admit what we see in them is inside us. And now we've disowned and disempowered ourselves by deflecting again and disowning that part, leaving us empty. That's why anytime we judge somebody above or below us, we feel empty. We don't really have a match. And now when we look down on them and look up to us, we tend to be on the narcissistic side and we project our values onto them and expect them to live in our values. When we were on the underdog side, we altruistically wanted to sacrifice ourselves for them. Now we want to sacrifice them for us. So either we're sacrificing ourselves for them or them for us. And neither one of those is sustainable because nobody wants to be in a relationship where there are underdogs and overdog. When you're in the underdog position, you're afraid of losing them and you're interested in holding on to them and clinging to them. You can be jealous and they feel that they haven't met a match. And so they keep their options open. And when you're looking down on them and you're thinking you're self-righteous, you're keeping your options open. When you're the underdog, you don't want to say negative things because you want to lose them. When you're the overdog, you don't want to say positive things because you don't want to mislead them.
Yeah.
So either case, this imbalanced state has deflected awareness, and you really don't own what you see in them. There's no perfect matching, reflection. Pure reflective awareness is when you can see that whatever you see in them, you have in you. And whatever you're judging in them, you're looking back at yourself and realizing you're only reacting to your judgments in them because they're reminding you of a part you now own. So when you have reflective awareness, you have true intimacy, and you don't have narcissism or altruism. You don't have overdogs and underdogs. You have a match, which is what people want. They want a match. They want somebody that they can respect and have dialogue with instead of alternating monologues.
Mm.
So true intimacy, which is authenticity, when you're able to be yourself and be loved for who you are, allows you to maximize the relationship dynamic and have the most respect and the most sustainability because you now have pure reflective awareness. And the reason why I call it intimacy is because there's no gaps between what you see in them and you. You own reflectively what you see in them. And there's a match because you're looking in the mirror and seeing what you projected.
Into me, you see.
Exactly.
Yeah. So interesting. So when we don't have that balance, what are the consequences? What are the consequences on our health? What are the consequences on our immune system, on our autonomic? What happens when we're not authentic?
Well, anytime we are perceiving that what they're doing is not supporting us, not living up to expectation, and it's challenging us because we're wanting to change them to be like the way we want, and we feel superior and then inferior, that challenge activates our sympathetic nervous system. And our sympathetic nervous system activates testosterone. It makes the blood sugar go up, the blood pressure go up. It puts testosterone up because we're on defense. And we tend to, because we're disowning things, we're wanting to project our righteousness onto them and tell them what to be and what to do.
Yeah.
Now, when that sympathetic side of the autonomics comes online, we methylate epigenetically the DNA and histones, which is gene expression in the cells. And based on what we're judging, will determine what areas of the body, particularly those cells, the cells that are going to be involved. But when we do that, as I said, glucagon, if it's a pancreatic cell, glucagon goes up if we're sympathetic, and blood sugar goes up. If it's a heart rate and it affects the kidneys, the blood pressure can go up because it can change the sodium potassium and it can change the baroreceptors. So every cell in the body has receptor sites for these autonomic nerve transmissions or nerve signal molecules. And when we have sympathetic dominance, it could create a host of symptoms. If you were to go through and make a list of all of the autonomic responses, what the sympathetic does to every cell or what the parasympathetic does to every cell, anytime we feel we're superior and where they're challenging us, all of the sympathetic symptomatology starts coming online, particularly based on what it is that we are judging and looking down on. On the other hand of the cycle, if all of a sudden, and I say cycle because we vacillate in our feelings about somebody, on the other side, when we're infatuated with them, the blood sugar goes down. We get hypoglycemic instead of hyperglycemic. So we have more likely hypoglycemia than diabetes when we're infatuated with somebody. Our blood pressure goes down. We're sacrificing. We're playing underdog. Our muscles that normally get ready for fight or flight relax, and our digestive system comes into play. That's why when you're infatuated with somebody, you take them out to dinner and want to digest and rest. Take them to dinner and sleep with them. You
Yes.
know, so we give them chocolate, right, to increase the probability of them associating pleasure with us, sugar with us, and then we try to feed them, right, to make them more subdued and less aggressive, and then we try to get them to sleep because now they're ready to sleep. So
Yeah.
it's a parasympathetic mechanism, and so each of the perceptions affect the epigenetic through transmitters, which affect the cells, which affect physiology. And each of those symptoms, if you understand what each cell represents and what the autonomics are doing to every cell, you can get a sense by the symptoms what psychologically is going on in the mind. I have a new book that I'm working on right now that'll be out probably in 6 months, called Balance the Mind, Heal the Body.
Nice.
And
Beautiful.
yeah, it's designed to help people understand this scenario, how it works, how our perceptions affect neurotransmitters and regulators and hormones and transmitters and regulator and modulators, and how that affects gene expression and how it affects cells, and then what those symptoms are, and then what do those symptoms mean psychologically.
Yeah. So what are some of those symptoms, or what are some of those triggers that happen?
Well, let's say that you're playing underdog in a relationship and you're afraid to say too much negativity and you're repressing what you're wanting to say,
Yeah.
and
It's probably
you're
probably very common, right?
oh yeah, very common, particularly
Yeah.
in the female.
Yeah.
They're what they really think they're not willing to say yet, particularly in the early stages.
Yeah.
uh, they're building up resentment slowly but surely. They're building up resentment because when they're playing underdog, and they're minimizing themselves, the resentment builds them back up to try to level the playing field because
Mm.
they're playing, they're repressing. While they repress, their thyroid gland, the thyroid gland originates from the thyroglossal duct, which is a portion of the tongue, and then comes and descends down below the tongue and then ends up with the thyroid gland right in this area, thyroid cartilage there. And right, what happens is the tongue is involved in speech and swallowing, and people that have low thyroid have difficulty speaking and swallowing. They get thick tongues and slow speech and dry
Yeah.
skin and dry hair. So
Wow.
what happens is if you repress yourself, you repress the autonomic impact on the thyroid gland.
I heard you
And
say
so,
dry. I heard you say dry ass before. Is that do you also get dry ass?
well, you can get that. You can get that from the sympathetic side. That's the sympathetic side. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
But if you repress yourself and you
Uh,
start to build resentment, the autonomic nervous system, the purpose of building resentment is to try to counterbalance that and get yourself back up again. The autonomic is a homeostatic mechanism trying to keep your body back in homeostasis, back into balance.
mm,
So we literally create symptoms to rebalance ourselves from our perception. And what's interesting is epigenetically, when you get sympathetic, sympathetics oxidize. So it creates methyl groups to go and reduce the chemistry. And when you're parasympathetic, it alkalinizes and reduces, and it creates acetyl groups that oxidize. So the body is doing what it can to bring things back into authenticity and homeostasis. Because when you're in homeostasis, you heal. And when you're in authenticity, you have the most stable long term relationships. So the physiology is creating symptoms. The thyroid gland is giving us feedback. You see people with low thyroids are repressing themselves, but you see people with high thyroids that nonstop talk, 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 and tactless speech. They don't worry
yeah.
about it because when you're self-righteous, you don't care about what their opinion is. You like to push them away because they're getting too close to you. When you're the
Uh-huh.
other way, you don't want them to leave, so you're afraid to speak up. So there's the thyroid gland is expressing the psychology just as the pancreas is doing it with blood sugar, just as the heart and kidneys are doing it with blood pressure. And the skin is doing it with dryness or moistness. And the digestive system, what's interesting, when we get under distress and we perceive something challenging us, the blood goes from our digestive organs and goes out to the periphery into our muscles for fight or flight. But when we're under relaxation, we're with somebody that's not challenging us but supporting us, it goes back out of the muscles and goes back into the digestive organs and reproducing organs. So that way you eat and make love and procreate and create mitosis and growth,
Mm.
anabolic. But when we're under stress, we go to catabolic. We shut down mitosis, we shut down digestive systems. That's why if we're under high stress, we don't digest foods very well. And so the blood and everything goes from the internal organs to the external periphery, the soma, the viscera to the soma. When you're under relaxation, it goes from the soma to the viscera. Well, inside the cell, the same thing occurs. Every cell of the body has little filaments and little micro um, motor muscle filaments, you might say, dynein and kinesin, that when you're under stress, it transports things from the center of the cell out to the periphery for defense. And when it's relaxed, it transports it back to the center so we can undergo mitosis and growth. So we have an anabolic and a catabolic, parasympathetic, sympathetic side in every cell of the body. So we can take any cell, look at what's happening in the cell, look at the microtubules and the cytoarchitectural structure of it, and tell what's going on with the autonomics and get a sense, by a history, of what psychologically is going down that might lead to these symptomatologies. And I've loved studying that. I've been doing that since 1978, really.
Wow. It's
Long time.
super interesting. I love it. I love it. It's super interesting. A lot of times, people, people today talk about there's certain words that people throw around, and talk about a lot. And one of those words are the mitochondria. So how does the mitochondrial health or fitness, mitochondrial, balance, how does that relate to this that you're mentioning, talking about right now?
Well, the mitochondria, according to the endosymbiotic theory, was once like a blue-green algae oxygen releasing bacteria that was eaten by another bacteria, and it became a symbiote. It started living inside another cell, and instead of being digested, it became useful, and they worked together. At one time, we didn't have oxygen on the planet, but eventually blue-green algae released oxygen. And at first, it was toxic, and cells didn't live with oxygen. But it built
Hmm.
up a response. It built up enzymes to counterbalance oxygen. And so we use that cell, the mitochondria, which was once a cell, they believe, um, as a way of making sure we oxidize and get our oxidative phosphorylation, our energy levels. It's the energy currency of the cell.
Hmm.
If we have a sympathetic excess or a parasympathetic excess at the cell level, the mitochondria are impacted and their production is affected. So our energy levels, if we go any way, one way or the other, too far one way or the other, will get bored or burned out.
Hmm.
Bored, reduced, or burned out, oxidized. And the mitochondria is got a feedback system to regulate that based on the outside transmitters that hit the cell wall. So the mitochondria is basically keeping us maximizing our energy levels. And if we're in high stress levels or high infatuation levels and exaggerating ourselves or minimizing ourselves, it lets us know with either boredom or burnout. And both of them lower energy levels. So we also
Hmm.
have a reticular activating system in our brainstem that is responding in order to calm down perceptions or speed up perceptions by falling asleep or waking up and allowing some things not to be brought into the awareness or being brought into the awareness in order to try to counterbalance those. So it's working with the thalamus to try to regulate our perceptions in order to maintain our energy levels homeostatically. It's amazing. The body is just absolutely amazing interconnected homeostatic. There's thousands of interconnected homeostatic mechanisms to balance the body.
Yeah, yeah. It is absolutely fascinating. You mentioned a word there that I think a lot of people talk about. It's become like this word, this buzzword, and that's the word burnt out. I noticed like a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people, in business, in a lot of tech companies, a lot of people, tech owners, they put a lot of stress. They put a lot of stress on themselves, but also put a lot of stress on their teams. And a lot of them, they use the word "I'm burnt out" or "I burnt out." And it becomes this thing, and obviously a big reason why people they either quit or they get sick. What do you how do you why is that the burnt out phase or the idea of burnt out happens in business so much?
Well, burnout means that you're oxidizing, which is fire. Yeah. Aristotle called it fire.
Mm,
The humorists by Empedocles and then Hippocrates, they had an idea that there were the four elements: fire, air, water, and earth. And fire and air were oxidation from sympathetic, and water and earth is reduction for parasympathetic. So all we did is carried it over into more detailed anatomy and physiology over time. So what's interesting is when you're burned out, it means that you are doing activities that are challenging your values and you feel trapped doing them.
mm,
And many people and I see this weekly in the Breakthrough Experience program,
yeah.
people say, well, I, my highest value is business, but as I do it, I burn out. And I
Mm,
said, no, let me clarify something for you.
yes.
It's not that business is burning you out. It's the activities within the business that you don't love doing that burn you out.
Mm,
See, I'm involved in business. My business is education. I love teaching, researching, writing, and traveling the world. You know me enough to know that.
yeah,
I
yeah,
can do
yeah.
that. I can do that 20 hours a day. No problem. You
Mm,
don't burn out doing that part that you love doing. But if I had to do administration and ordering supplies and scheduling things or go online and try to do a flight arrangements or logistics or any other part of the business,
mm,
I would be burned out because I would be challenged by something I really don't want to do. Anytime you're pursuing challenges that inspire you, you have eustress and you don't burn out with eustress. Anytime you're doing challenges that don't, you have distress. And that's the one that oxidizes and burns you out. Now, what's interesting is people say I burned out. What that meant is that they were not as efficient as they could be in prioritizing and delegating and making sure they're dedicated to the very highest priority, most meaningful actions and delegating lower priority distractions. They're doing low priority things under the guise of I'm busy in business, and they're confusing busyness with productivity.
yeah.
And that's what burns them out. And when they work for other people, sometimes they're afraid to confront and to prove to the powers to be in the company that they
Mm,
can produce more for the company and produce a greater margin if they are doing what their expertise is, where they're most engaged, and they delegate the other things down to free them up to produce more per minute or per hour. So the reason they're burnt out is not because work. You don't burn out from the magnitude of work and service you provide. You do it by having a built-in brake resisting the actions you don't want. Anytime you're not doing the highest priority things, your blood glucose and oxygen goes into the amygdala, and the amygdala wants to avoid pain and seek pleasure. It wants to avoid predators, seek prey, avoid sympathetic and seek parasympathetic. So the second you're not in priority, that comes online, and then you want to stop doing the things you don't want to do, and then you get burned out. That's why it's so important to prioritize your daily actions. That also, when you come home, when you've been doing higher priority things and you feel you knocked it out of the ballpark at the end of the day and you did the priorities, you come
yeah.
home, you have a higher probability of objectivity and resiliency, adaptability, and intimacy. But if you
Mm,
came and you did, and you had to put out fires all day long and do low priority things and stuff you didn't want to do it, your relationship and intimacy is down because you're going to be judging. You're in your amygdala. The amygdala wants you addicted to pride. You think you're right, and you have a fantasy of pleasure without pain. You come home, your spouse doesn't live up to that fantasy and doesn't live in your values. And now you have a challenge in the relationship. So there's a correlation between psychology, expectations, relationship, prioritization, and your health. They're all woven together. You can't separate them.
wow. That's fascinating. And I think about that because when you talk, I also heard, I think I've heard you say about talk about, when you are pushing and you, like I said, the activities that you don't love doing, and you're always trying to prove yourself that you're good enough, that you keep pushing in a job, and that you're not being able to fulfill and get the appreciation or the praise, and so you keep pushing, and you're never getting there. It's like a hamster wheel. Is that part
Yes,
also of the burning out?
yes. But the reason why is see the amygdala, when you're doing lower party things, the amygdala comes online. The
Mm,
amygdala is addicted to pride. It needs accolade and fantasy. And the fantasy is that the world's supposed to match your values. So
yes.
now you're expecting people to honor you for who you are and you're proud. And then when you don't get it, you get angry. And then
Mm,
the sympathetic comes in and that burns you out. Why? Because you're not doing by priority and you're designed to burn out when you're not living by priority. See, most people don't realize that every symptom in their business, in their health, and in a relationship is a feedback mechanism to get them back to authenticity, back to priority, and to get them back to doing what's most deeply meaningful to them. And when you
mm,
get that, then you understand the symptoms aren't terrible things. It's their feedback systems to guide you to authenticity. The business symptoms are trying to let you know you're not in priority. You're not
yeah.
engaged in what you're doing. You're allowing yourself to not delegate lower priority things and burn yourself out trying to do it all yourself and then try to get acknowledged. But you're not designed to get acknowledged for doing low priority things. I want everybody to hear that. You're designed not to get acknowledged for doing low priority things because the universe doesn't authenticity.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. Wow. Interesting. So, when you think about in business, right? Like, well, a lot of people either they're working for someone or they're working, their own business with people. A lot of people when they're focused so much, they're so focused, they're so into what they're doing, and maybe they love what they're doing, uh, but look at that, they're isolating themselves. How does being isolated, what are the effects of isolation with health? Meaning, like, I'm thinking about oxytocin, being a connection, but a lot of times I've heard a lot of CEOs, they maybe started a business with friends, right? And then they became a CEO. They got that role of being a CEO, and now all of a sudden, like, they separate themselves and they put themselves maybe a little bit on the pedestal, or maybe their friends put them on the pedestal, or
Just nailed the real reason. You just nailed the reason.
yeah, tell me.
They bought into the illusion of superiority.
Ah, yes. So
You
then
know,
then they feel pressure, so they isolate themselves and push their people, away. And so, what are the consequences of isolating yourself as a CEO, as a founder, or a business owner?
well, if you love the people you're working with, you love the clients you're working with. You know, I've been speaking 51 years, and when I go and speak, I've been told many, many times as a speaking engagement. So I've got one coming up in India. There'll be 10,000 people. And when I speak there, they'll immediately want to rush me off the thing and get away from the people. And I said, why? That's what I'm here for. They go, but you don't want to get too close to those people. And I said, why? I said, well, they'll drain you. I said, no, they'll drain you if you have an expectation that you don't want to talk to them and don't want to
Uh-huh.
serve them.
Yeah.
So if you care about your employees, you care about your customers, you care about that, um, you realize that you're just as dependent on them as they are on you.
Yes.
They're important people. When I live on the ship, and I'm friends with all the staff, and I go and we go like this and say good morning or handshake whatever the staff every day. And people
Mm,
say, well, why do you bow down or become friends with the staff? And
yes.
I said, because everything that I delegate, they're taking care of for me. They're just as important to me as I am to them. I help them pay their bills and give them jobs. But at the same time, they make it possible for me to teach, research, write, and travel, and they take care of everything else.
Mm.
So the second we feel superior to someone, and then we think there's nobody out there in our place in the world, we've just isolated ourselves.
Mm.
But you realize that if you're on a mission of being of service to people, your loved ones are there. That's who your loved ones are. They're part of the family, if you will. You know, it was
Mm.
Milton who was interviewed, the John Milton, the poet. You know, they asked him, you know, are you not a lonely man? Lonely? How could I be lonely? Aren't I another star in the Milky Way? And so it's a frame of reference of where you play. Yes, there may be few CEOs that you may be able to talk certain things to. That may be true, but I don't have a problem getting on and studying the great classics. There's always somebody out there, a Nobel Prize. I'm working on a new book on Nobel Prize winners. I'm going to go through all the Nobel Prize winners and write summaries of their speeches and their backgrounds and their work. And so, and
Wow.
I've written books on philosophy, and I'm doing a book on the history and evolution of morality, and I'm always writing. When I go and I study these people, there are innumerable great minds out there that I can participate in, and they're part of my family also. So there's
Mm.
never a lack of somebody unless you think that you're at the top and that you can't learn anymore. Then you might
Mm.
isolate yourself. And if you think you're superior with arrogance, but that's all amygdala responses. That's not an executive function. The true executive function is not something superior, arrogant, autocratic. It's caring enough to communicate what the mission is in a way that helps fulfill all the people, the stakeholders, the stockholders, you know, the employees. Let me share a really, I think, a real practical experience.
Yeah.
There's a little video online that most anybody can look up with Jeff Bezos.
Mm.
It's a little thing about him talking about Sony and what inspired him to be customer centric.
Mm.
It's a little video. It's just a three-minute video, 4 minute video, and it's brilliant. And he was inspired by the head of Sony, who had a dream and vision to go do something extraordinary and to
Mm.
put Japan on the map, not as a copycat country as they once were thought to be, but
Mm.
as to make a difference in a whole country. It wasn't
Mm.
for his company. It wasn't for his own needs and ego. It was for the sake of Japan. He had a cause bigger than himself that he was committed to.
Mm.
And he said, we're going to be customer centric. We're going to make sure that we give quality products. And I want Japan to be known for quality. Well,
Mm.
Bezos took that idea and thought, brilliant idea. So he became customer centric. Well, he did an extraordinary job making Amazon customer centric. He man, it made it where he put a lot of other people been out of business because he was so efficient.
Yeah.
But, but what happened is he was going along and it was just growing exponentially. And then all of a sudden, all the staff and all the people, employees in his company started to think, well, we're working extra hard and we're not getting acknowledged and paid well. So they
Mm.
end up gathering together in collective bargaining and they put together a Teamster union to go against Bezos. And Bezos realized he was customer centric, but he wasn't employee centric also. So
Ah.
he was exaggerating the customer, but he wasn't honoring the employee. And so he was out of fair exchange with the employees, but with fair exchange with the customer. So the customer was booming, but the fair exchange with the employees was a little autocratic, a little bit narcissistic. So they got
Mm.
the Teamsters Union in order. That's a symptom to let you know,
Mm.
because the symptom of not growing a business, the customers now have a demand, you're meeting their needs. Now the employees are not meeting their demands. They're putting a union in collective bargaining to try to get what they want. It's a
Mm.
symptom, a
Mm.
feedback to letting you
Yeah.
know that you're not authentic, you're narcissistic to your employees, and you're looking down and you're expecting them to live in your values. And so you get the symptoms to get you back. So he started to get that and he leveled the playing field and remembered his employees and leveled that. Well, then when that happened, the margins dropped a bit. When that occurred, the stockholders are saying, hey, you know, what the stock's starting to slow down in its growth, which is inevitable in most companies.
Uh-huh.
So he had to think of the stockholders. So he had to change the dividends a bit and have to change some of the things he's doing for the stockholders to make sure they're met. But
Mm.
wait, now you've got a growth because now that made the growth of the entire company more effective. So even though he's getting less return per unit, the growth of the company, now that everybody's satisfied, go up and he ends up with more. But wait, now he's got an antitrust system because so many people's businesses are out of business and automation has wiped out businesses. So now the government representing the people come in to create a symptom to try to make sure he's fair and not in antitrust suits and monopoly systems are coming in play. So
Mm.
every symptom in a business is a feedback mechanism to make sure that sustainable, fair exchange, not narcissism or altruism, which is actually healing the business. Just like our body does the same thing, it creates symptoms to help us heal our relationships and our perceptions. So the body, the business, all organizations strive for these homeostatic mechanisms. In a book called What is Life in 1944 by Erwin Schrödinger, he talked about negentropy, the tendency to bring order out of disorder.
Mm.
That's what life is about. Then what is disorder? Missing information.
Mm.
Disorder, according to Claude Shannon, disorder is nothing but missing information. We're unconscious of the needs of our customers. We're unconscious of the needs of our employees. We're unconscious of our own needs. If we're altruistic, we're not meeting our needs. If we're narcissistic, we're not meeting their needs. And so the unconscious is constantly being brought out of repression into full conscious awareness so we can have sustainable fair exchange and have autonomic balance, homeostasis, resiliency, adaptability, maximum genius, innovation, creativity. All the symptoms are guiding us. Every relationship at home and our relationship with our kids and our spouse, exact same thing, trying to guide us to the magnificence of who we are.
Wow, that's amazing. So what are the key elements of a holistic approach to wellness then?
I don't think you can separate physical wellness, which is what most people think of.
Right.
Illness means I. Wellness means we.
Mm.
So there's a primordial boundary between self and other. Self versus all other than self. When the self and the other are in equilibrium, we have wellness. When the self and the other are not in equilibrium, we have illness, because we think I. And so anytime we are too proud or too humble to admit what we see in other people inside us, we're going to create illness. And
Wow.
anytime we see that whatever we see in others is inside us and have pure reflective awareness, we'll have wellness. Because we're our eating patterns, you'll find out if you take 1,000 people, and I've spoken in many different settings at different sizes groups, and I can ask any group size, how many of you, when you're under distress, overeat? And you'll put exactly half the number in the room will put their hands up. How many of you undereat? And the other half will put their hands up. Some are overeaters, some are undereaters. Some is leptin and some is ghrelin hormones. And those
Mm.
hormones are feedback mechanisms from those two personas of narcissism altruistic perspectives. One is lower when our blood sugar is lower, we need to eat. When our blood sugar is higher, our blood sugar is too high, we need to not eat. And so we got feedbacks, even in our dietary patterns, authentic. Every hormone is got a feedback system to try to guide us back to homeostasis and authenticity.
So what do you think that we are so that there's so much struggle around people being either overweight or being like skinny, or like there's this struggle about how we look, how we feel, and why are we not better at balancing or navigating or understanding the signal?
We've been taught all our life moral hypocrisies. Be nice, don't be mean. Be kind, don't be cruel. Be positive, don't be negative. Be generous, don't be stingy. It's more blessed to give than to receive. We've been taught. Paul Dirac, the Nobel Prize winner, said that it's not that we don't know so much, it's we know so much that isn't so. We're bombarded by it.
Mm.
And we're taught everything. You're taught in school, wrong answer, right answer. And that's based on the model and the paradigm of the local society, not universal truths.
Wow.
So we're constantly bombarded with a division. And anytime we divide pleasure from pain, our amygdala runs our life, and we're going to be hedonistic, looking for that which is not obtainable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable. And we set up futility. And so the majority of people live in their amygdala because they haven't learned to prioritize their life. They haven't given themselves permission to take command and live by design. They're living by duty. They're trying to conform and fit in instead of stand out, even though they want to make a difference standing out, but they're afraid to. And majority of people, instead of listening to their physiology and psychology as a feedback, they're governed by their sociology politically and governed by their theology religiously, and they're letting the moral hypocrisies run their life, which is basically dividing them up into a disempowered state because they're easy to control that way.
Mm.
So the majority of people don't give themselves permission to be a leader of their own life, a master of their destiny. They become victims of history. And as a result of it, they're in their amygdala, and that's where they have no governance. It's only in the
Right.
executive center, in the medial prefrontal cortex, where we have self-governance. And unless we're prioritizing our life, and the majority of people, if you ask them, I've been doing value determinations 46 years. And if you ask people what their values are, I guarantee you they will tell you something that's usually fantasies, idealisms, and social expectations of tradition and convention. They won't tell you what their life demonstrates. And so
Ah,
they don't know what's really priority to them. They think they do.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting, because I know you talk a lot about living authentically and embracing your true self, and if you think about how do we overcome the fear of judgment or the fear of criticism that often holds us back from being our true selves?
Well, because we've been bombarded by the moral hypocrisies, we're supposed to be nice, never mean, kind, never cruel, that we think that's how we're supposed to be. But we
Yeah,
can't. No human being is one sided. No
yeah,
human beings. So you're
right,
striving for that which is unobtainable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable, which is the source of human suffering, as Buddha said. So the fantasy of trying to be a nice person all the time without
mm,
being mean, or kind without being cruel, or generous without being stingy are delusions. They're
right,
delusions taught, and people think they're supposed to be that way, and they're afraid of rejection if they're not that way, even though they are in private.
yeah,
If
yeah,
I ask somebody, um, and if I went up to a woman, I've done this thousands of times in the breakthrough experience. I said, I just met you. I think you're always nice, never mean, always kind, never cruel. And they go, their bullshit meter goes off, and they're going, not exactly. No, because they know better, because their intuition knows that they have both sides. But
yeah,
people still, even though they know they have both sides, they still live in a fantasy. I want to be one sided. I want to get a little bit more on this side. And
mm,
that one sided is constantly skewing you from acknowledging the magnificence of both sides of your life. You don't need to get rid of half of yourself to love yourself. And that's what people are trying to do. They're trying to get rid of what they think is the shadow, and the shadow's got light in it, and the light's got shadow in it, and they're not separated. Our
right,
banks, let's just look at what the banking system does.
yeah,
The banking system promoted over the last 70 years suburbs, because then you needed a car, and they would get you on a car for 25,000. A house in the suburbs get you for another 200,000. A credit card for the mall, right? And then they'd fractional reserve you, and then lend out 9 to 1, you know, and then you don't really own what it is. You don't really, if you went on a bank run and you couldn't get it there, and they've separated with a credit card, they've separated pleasure from pain. You go shopping, and then you pay years later. So the pain is dispersed and separated from the pleasure. If you had to
uh,
pay everything in cash, the pain and pleasure would be simultaneous. And anytime you separate pain from pleasure, you activate the amygdala. And anytime you join pain and pleasure simultaneously, you activate the executive center. So you're taking people out of their executive function and into their amygdala, where they are disempowered and they're basically animals out of control. The moment you separate that, and the banking system was set up that way to make sure they maximize profits at the expense of people who didn't understand how to manage money. And so
wow,
now most people buy a house, 25% of their house is storage of depreciable liabilities that don't go
yeah,
up in value, go down in value. So if they
uh-huh.
have a $250,000 house, or a $500,000 house, or $1 million house, if you add up 25 years of paying a mortgage on it, and if you buy $250,000 for just storage, that's $750,000 you're paying as a slave that keeps you buying something to make you feel better about yourself with retail therapy in order to compensate to fill up a house full of crap. And then you end up wondering why you're in debt.
Yeah, yeah. So do you think that, so if you look at the business structure of being out of balance there, or not looking like you mentioned a story about Bezos, is that the same thing? Is that why a lot of banks are
Yes.
like struggling?
Yes.
Is
Well,
that they're out of equanimity?
when banks become unregulated,
Mm.
and because that works as long as everybody pays, and and during the cycle, the market cycle, the business cycle, it goes every 7 to 10 years, you get a cycle. When it's in the crescendo, the banks make money, everybody thinks they're fine, it looks like a great thing. It's a credit cycle. But then
Yeah,
when it goes the other direction, everybody goes now into pain. I got to pay off my debt. I'm in living in debt. And the majority of people overspend and live in debt. The
yeah,
average person carries 10% of their gross income per year on credit card debt at 20
yeah,
something percent in some cases.
yeah.
And so as long as you live in that way, you're going to be creating your own suffering, right? It's because you don't. But it used to be, when I was a kid,
Mm.
when you wanted to buy something, you didn't have a credit card. You put
Right.
it on layaway. You bought it, and when you paid it, you got it. It was reverse. Now you
Yeah,
pay afterwards and pay interest. There you got a discount if you paid in advance and put it on layaway. And people did that because they had immediate gratification was not their focus. It was deferred gratification. And deferred gratification grows your wealth and your health. Because wealth and health come from the same roots, wheel. It means the same thing. So if you manage your wealth, you manage your health because there's a correlation between health and wealth.
wow, that's amazing. So how do we practically align and balance our wellness, our wealth, our health, and live in authenticity?
The executive center, every time you live according to priority.
Actually, one question that comes with that, because you keep mentioning the executive center, and I think about a lot of the executives in business, uh, they don't seem to be so executive. I mean,
No,
they're right,
no,
and
they're
so
not.
right, so they're trying to make all these decisions, trying to guide and lead all these people, and they're completely not coming from their executive center.
Well, let's look at the word government,
Yes,
right? Government, you could perceive it as governmentus, one who can govern their mind.
yes.
But that's not what's in place. What's usually in place is the extremists that are amygdala driven, that are sensationalists, that tend to polarize and tell people what they want to hear, right? They
Mm,
tell the rich what they want to hear. I'm going to pay less taxes, and they go the poor. I'm going to make sure you get a better salary, and they're going to tell you what you want to hear to get voted, and then they're going to do what is necessary for them to keep getting voted. It's a game. So Machiavelli and the Prince did a beautiful job, and he summarized it. They still teach it in universities because of his knowledge,
ah,
and they summarized, politics. And it's not necessarily ideally you would have a wise individual that cares about people, but that's
mm,
not always the case. So we end up foolishly allow rhetorical persuasion by a politician to convince us because we're gullible that they're going to do something instead of holding them accountable. And so in the process of doing it, we create our own illusions, perpetuate the illusions of their leaders, and that perpetuates it. Rarely we get a real leader that we would probably hire because the leader would hold us accountable, and we don't want that. We want pleasure without pain. That's what the average person wants. They don't want
right.
accountability. But accountability is deferred gratification, is a balanced orientation, is where resilience and adaptability and greatness comes from. And very few people are willing to be accountable.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us more about your book. Is your book going to cover some of these things in your book about
Yes.
time?
Yeah, I'm gonna do my best to do it. I'm gonna try to do it within 250 pages anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got thousands of pages on that field,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I'm gonna try to do a little bit simplified text for people. But I wrote a 1,000-page book on the psychology behind all the 1,000 illnesses, and I'm
yeah.
I'm gonna now try to put a little lighter version of that together for people.
Wow, that's amazing. So when you think about let's say you talk about the executive center and people running companies, and they're responsible for maybe 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 employees, and they're being you know they're trying to run the company, but they're trying to juggle everything. What do you think? What is the way to literally let your executive center be in charge, but be in control of it, and not be reactive, not to live in the amygdala? How do you as
It's
a leader
how
navigate?
masterful you are. It's how masterful you are at dedicating to the highest priority and delegating the lower priorities. That's how efficient it is. I
Mm,
was just having lunch today, just before I came on, with
mm,
the CEO of International Coaching, which is a pretty high-end coaching system. It's the top CEOs in the world that are retired that are now coaching other CEOs of major companies. It's
mm,
a they charge like $4 million a year for their coaching services. And so I was chatting with the CEO of that, the founder of that. He's a very bright guy. And we were talking about that. How do you find a CEO that's really a CEO?
mm, mm,
And how do you find that? And he said, it's not easy. And because people are worried about losing a job, or that's why, when Warren Buffett has the CEOs of the companies and in the 260 different subsidiaries that he leaves them alone because they're a high level functioning CEOs. That's why
mm,
people invested in them. But what's interesting is when you get a person who is absolutely inspired by what they're doing, loves what they're doing. It was Peter Lynch in One Up on Wall Street in the 90s. He's still around, as far as I know. And he basically said something that really had an impact on me in the 90s.
mm,
He said, I go and do my technical and quantitative analysis on stocks, and I look for intrinsic value, and I look for quality companies, and then I get on a plane, usually a private jet, and I go
mm,
to the headquarters of the companies that I'm thinking about investing in. And he says, and I walk around the main center, the main flagship place, and then I'm looking for six things. I'm looking for people who are grateful for their job, loving what they do, inspired by the vision of the company, enthusiastically working, which is not excitement, but enthusiasm. It's different. They're not
mm,
manic, they're enthused. They feel
mm,
it's their calling to work there. They're
mm.
certain about their skill because they're experts, and they're present while they do it. He says, if you got that, that company is executively governed. The people are allocated and engaged, and you can guarantee appreciation and value. That's so
Wow.
accurately stated.
Mm,
And that's wellness, and that's relationship wellness,
yeah.
and that's physical wellness. Because people are loving what they do and are engaged like that, their wellness quotient goes up, their sickness is decreased, they're needing for breaks. I was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal about 8 years ago,
Mm,
and this lady introduced me. She said, Dr. Demartini, we'd like to interview and get your feedback on this. And I said, great. And she says, there's an article that just came out saying that the average employee needs a break every 45 minutes, a 15-minute break. So every hour they work for 45. He says, I'd like to have your feedback and what you think about all that. And I
yeah.
said, that's BS, absolute BS.
Oh.
And she goes, really? Why? And said, because when people are inspired by what they do, they don't even think about breaks.
Mm,
And when people are unengaged and uninspired, they can't wait to get away from what they're doing. They need a break. They're wanting a fix, sugar fix, coffee fix, a stimulant, because they're engaged. But
yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
really engaged in something, you don't even know time. You're not even focused on it. You only take a break if you really got to pee or poo or eat. And then you
Right.
sometimes you get a catheter and you get a porta potty and you get an IV in your place so you can continue to work doing what you love.
I love
But
that.
so what I told her, I smashed the article and I said the article is interviewing people who are unengaged, uninspired by their job, and then making that. And if you do that and make that a standard, you're moving in the direction of a socialistic idea where people, you know, giving them pleasure and immediate gratification is going to be better than actually doing something that's meaningful. But meaning always differentiates us from the animals, and it
Mm.
differentiates us and gives us fulfillment in life. And immediate
Mm.
gratification and a quick fix for a coffee break is not where meaning is. So
Yeah.
I'm not promoting that. I'm not saying you can't take a break if you need to, if you drank too much, but a coffee stimulates you and then you sedate and crash. And then you got to do another coffee and it sedates it. Anything that causes volatility is going to lower productivity in the long run. But a mission, an inspired mission, and
Yeah.
people engage and really allocated properly for the job where they can't wait to get up and do it and they're greater at it than anybody who's guiding them, that is
Yeah.
going to guarantee to increase appreciation in the company.
Nice. Question that I read a study about that, about basically it was 3 points, and probably correlates exactly to those points that you talked about Lynch. The study said that, why people are disengaged. The three major points they said, number one is that they don't feel seen or appreciated by their boss, so whoever runs the company, that they don't see them, or they don't appreciate what they're doing. Number one. Number two is that what they're doing is not, they don't perceive it to be significant. They don't perceive it
Meaningful.
to be meaningful. Yeah. And number three, that they're not measuring, there's no measurement to see if are they succeeding, are they making progress, are they moving forward, are they growing? And so because they don't have those three parameters, they disengage and lose interest.
Those are all accurate, um, but they're all also partly symptoms of the amygdala. Because when somebody is not fulfilled in what they're doing, they need praise. They need more acknowledgement. They need
Ah,
more pleasure. They need more uh, feedback that they're doing good because they need their pride. They need people addicted to acknowledgement and praise can't handle criticism. So now,
mm,
if you have a CEO who is now feeling superior to people and disengaged and not caring about them and not grateful for them, you got one of those problems. Again,
ah,
that's an isolated CEO that we talked about earlier. Then, if you have somebody who's not engaged in what they're doing and wanting to metric themselves, see, one of the signs you have somebody that's engaging, they love to metric their own progress. They don't need to be controlled from the outside to see how they're doing. They want to know how they're doing and they want to keep refining what they're doing.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they automatically, and they're prioritizing and they're doing something that's meaningful. So they feel meaningful and they don't even feel like they have to be praised. So those are symptoms of partial disengagement, why they
mm,
need that. But it's true that they need that. If somebody is inspired by what they do, the level of that need drops. And if the person who's the CEO is inspired by what they do and they care about people, I mean, I've met CEOs, the head of Drake International, Bill Pollock. Uh, I've had many hours with this guy. He's a really amazing guy.
mm,
I've saw him interact with his people, and he knows their names, knows what they do, and can tell
mm,
you the impact they have on the company. And they'll say it right in front of him. They said, "Look, this guy's been with me for 16 years, 22 years. He runs this division, and he's cognizant because he's not feeling superior and isolated. He doesn't feel lonely. He's
ah,
not isolating himself. He's caring about his customer. He'll write a personal letter to customers. He'll write a personal letter to employees, and
mm.
he's willing to hear about their progress. That's why he's got one of the biggest companies in the world, right? Drake. So, and he started in 1951 in Toronto with a temporary service, and he kept looking at what does the companies need. They needed temporary people. What else they need? Well, they need insights on how to manage, and so he just kept looking. What do people need, and how do I deliver it? And then what about the people that want to deliver it? Is it meeting their needs? So he was really exemplifying what was possible. He's a really amazing guy, and he's 90 something years old today, and he's still cranking.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, so I have a question for you. What is so you? I mean, I know you're writing a lot of books right now. What is your next level? What is the evolution of Demartini?
Well, I just keep teaching, researching, writing, and traveling. That's what I love doing. And
Uh,
I keep adding new countries to where I've wanted to travel because I want to go to every country, getting close.
yeah.
And I want to keep putting out materials, anything that might help maximize awareness and potential and the involvement of human consciousness and the contribution to people feeling like they're doing, something meaningful and extraordinary in their life. I'm in. That's what I do. That's what we have in common. We're both committed to that outcome. And so
Yeah.
as I'm concerned, I'll keep doing that. I've been doing it 51 years. I don't see any evidence of slowing down or stopping. So I'm still doing that. And that's what I love doing. I've delegated everything else away. I don't have to do anything else. So that's what I get to do every day.
Wow, I love it. I love it. And that's why I love having you on here because your contribution to humanity and your ability to share these. I love the different disciplines. I remember you saying that one time, it's one of your trainings, and maybe you can mention a little bit about that. There's a lot of people talking about different things, right? They talk about, let's say they talk about brain optimization, or they talk about, eating, or they talk about love, and you have a way to bring all the disciplines together. So it becomes like a complete 360, perspective on it. What do you think about that when you see about different experts in different fields and how they narrow in on one piece and then they're missing pieces?
Well, it's been an interesting thing. I wanted to understand the laws of the universe when I was 18, 17.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made a list of every known discipline that was available, right? Chemistry, geology, astronomy, mathematics, physics, whatever discipline and subdiscipline I could find. I made a list of them all
Mm-hmm.
because I felt like if a universal law would apply in every discipline, if it's universal, I will be able to find it in all of them. So I set out to find out what is the most universal principles to build a body of knowledge on. And that led me to each of these disciplines. And I made a goal to read at least 100 books in each discipline. So I would have
Wow.
the equivalent of a PhD in each discipline. So I set out to be polymathic. I got inspired by Rene Descartes, who wanted to be a man of letters. I didn't care about a formal letterization inside some university because I found that the universities didn't have the standard I did. I realized that whatever they were expecting, I always multiplied it times 10. So I stopped subordinating to universities and just created my own university. I got more students than any university. So I
Wow.
basically set out to do that. And I wanted to know what the laws of the universe were because I found out that human laws, nobody can live, but
Mm,
universal laws, nobody can stop, nobody can deny, nobody cannot live. I
mm,
want to build things on that because that I can be more reliant on when I deliver that, it'll be more useful long term. And one of the quotes by Charlie Munger was about that. I thought he came to a similar conclusion. He said, the universal laws nobody can undermine. The human
mm,
laws nobody can live. And he said the same thing. And I've came to the same conclusion. So we go around with moral hypocrisies about how you're supposed to live, which is something we only hope to approximate but never obtain. And universal laws nobody can violate. Nobody's going to violate the law of gravity. So I
mm,
want to know, how does gravity affect psychology? And every
mm,
time you're emotional and you're elated and minimize yourself, or depressed, right? And exaggerate yourself, or any of those mechanisms, you're gravitational. You're weighing yourself down with emotional baggage. And anytime you're authentic, you lighten up. So you're radiant with gratitude, or you're gravitant with ingratitude. And so there are some physical and psychological laws that are perfectly correlated with universal laws. And those are the ones I'm interested in because those are the ones stand the test of time. And studying all the other hundreds and thousands of books on various fields, they don't defy what I find that way. So
right.
then it's almost like, how did you know that? And it's, well, I've studied over in this field and it's now applying here. And so that gives me a polymathic approach to different ways of looking at it. And people kind of go, what do you say? I mean, because they go, I never thought of it from that angle. But they're specialists and they give me insights. I have about 19 or 20 different specialists that send me articles and research daily. Believe
Yeah,
it or not,
yeah.
I get stuff in every single day from people in different fields because they're the specialists out there that feed me the most cutting edge information that I can quickly scan and devour and incorporate and put it into my work, and then I can build on it. So I'm appreciative of the specialist, but frankly, it would be uninspiring for me to be only in one little area. I met a guy in a plane that was reading an article next to me, and it was on
Yeah.
kinase enzyme in thyroid follicular cancer. And I said, "Do you mind when you finish that article? Can I read that?" He said, "You interested in kinase enzyme?" I said, "I am," because I've studied kinase enzyme and cell functions. And so he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm an educator." He says, "Are you in the health field?" I said, "Yeah, I'm in the health field." And he goes, and I devoured it and I took notes from it and I put it on my computer and I put it into my Prophecy One program and I put it in this other place in cell physiology because I wrote a book on cell physiology. And he was saying, "Well, what exactly do you do?" I said, "I'm just a guy who loves learning and I love to integrate information and I love to share it when it's needed in different settings. And I get lots of different settings." He said, "You're kind of a weird guy." And I said, "Yes, I'm weird." And he said, he traveled the world as a specialist on thyroid follicular cancer and kinase enzyme. He's a leading authority on that in the world.
Wow.
Great. But he knows more and more about less and less. I know probably less and less about more and more. And we both are doing what we love. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
happen to want to like the generalist more so than the specific, but I try to go in depth enough to keep up with the specifics.
They should give you a Nobel Prize for knowing all this stuff.
And I get a better price. I get paid more than he does. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Well, first of all, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today and sharing your knowledge, your experience, your wisdom. And I really appreciate you as always. Thank you so much. And I guarantee you that the people listening to this is gonna absolutely love this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the conversation and the questions, the journey, and everything. I mean, we've been on the journey together. So thank you.
Thank you.
Know someone who needs a shift in focus? Share this and be part of inspiring new habits and re-engage existing habits that work.